November 2018. First up is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Next up is approval of the minutes for November 7th, 2018, special meeting of the Transportation Committee.
Move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. And now, employee recognition. General Manager Lamb.
Yes, Madam Chair, members, today we get to recognize two different skill sets, if you will. One, we'll be able to, we want to recognize how alertness on the job really pays off and really from a safety perspective is so important. But the second one I really want to recognize is all about patience and what staying focused on needed outcomes can really mean to this region as a whole. But first, let's go back and I'd like to introduce Jim Perrin, who's, of course, our rail transit manager, and he's going to introduce rail operator Andrew Brokel and talk a little bit about how he was able to essentially save a person's life. Jim?
Hello. As Brian stated, my name is Jim Perrin. I work for Rail Transportation, and I would like to introduce you to Andrew Brokel. He's a train operator for us. His wife Laura is in attendance as well, and I want to relay something, an incident that occurred on September 1st. On September 1st, 2018, Mr. Brokel was traveling southbound on the Blue Line and was beginning his departure from Terminal 2, the Humphrey Terminal. An intoxicated passenger had alighted the train, and as Mr. Brokel was pulling away, he observed this individual having problems. Mr. Brokel observed this as he was approximately 150 feet away from the passenger and looking through a mirror. He then stopped the train immediately. The passenger fell onto the platform, striking his head, then rolled off the platform into the coupled areas of the cars. These events occurred very quickly. Had Mr. Brokel not observed that something was amiss and stopped immediately, this likely would have ended tragically. Metro Transit realizes this and wishes to send its heartfelt thanks to Mr. Brokel for a job well done. Thank you. I'll take a quick picture, please.
Thank you very much.
Secondly, Madam Chair, members, as you know, this last week we were able to celebrate a milestone accomplishment with the Green Line Extension Project. There were many elements that went into that, and I know, Madam Chair, you've been involved with many of them over the course of the last couple of years directly. But behind the scenes, there's always people that we count on that can put all the details together and form them into an agreement or set of agreements. And we really are very fortunate that we have one of the best in the business. And so to recognize that person, I'm going to call up Joan Hollick.
Here, we've got heels on. Of course. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. It is my pleasure to be here this afternoon to recognize Kelly McKeon, the SWLRT Agreements Lead. She's been with the Southwest Project Office since 2012 and has progressively taken on many new, additional, fun, exciting, and progressively responsible work assignments. First and foremost being heading up our negotiations with not one, not two, but 3 railroads and working with council leadership and Hennepin County leadership to negotiate some of the most difficult agreements that the council likely will enter into for a very long time. In addition to that, she's headed up agreements with our utility companies, our funding partners, and all of our cities along the corridor. And she's done this as a one-woman department. It's very impressive, and she always keeps her composure under tense negotiations and is always there with the details and the facts. And we thank her for her tireless work, the countless hours that she's put in, and she's looking forward to taking the next 5 years off while we are. So thank you, Kelly, for everything that you've done.
Yes, I got to see Kelly in action, and I heartily concur. Nice work. Thank you so much. Very grateful. Thank you. Thank you.
You and Jim are always competing.
Thank you. All right, next up is our Tav Liaison Report, and Peter Dugan is here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, General Manager Lamb, and Director Thompson. First off, congratulations to all of you on the Southwest Light Rail Transit. Everything. Groundbreaking this Friday. It's quite a, you can give yourself a round of applause. Yes, you can. And at the TAD meeting on November 21st, there were 6 business items, 4 of which will be here today with Cole Hineker and Joe Barbeau. 2 will be coming to you in January 14. On the agency notes, MPCA, you may know David Thornton, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Air Quality, who's retiring after 22 years. He'll have a gubernatorial appointment to replace him. From the MAC, there are 30 restaurants currently under construction behind the walls. And for those of you who, this is kind of a space where I work in, walls hide everything. They make the spaces look shorter. That's why everybody can say 100% done. It's 100% occupancy. So there's 30 spaces behind the walls. The new parking ramp is named Silver, and once that's completed, it will, the red and blue will be torn down. A new sculpture is coming. It'll take about 2 years to be installed. It's 37 feet high, which is approximately 3 stories. It will go from the baggage area to the mezzanine, and it will have 8,000 lights. And yes, the question was asked, who's going to change them and dust them? But it will have 8,000 lights, which will change color as passersby pass by. And the baggage turn tables will be replaced in 2020. Another item brought up, which Cole Hineker will address, is the Riverview Modern Streetcar, approximately along West 7th, from St. Paul to the Mall of America and MSP, 12 miles, 44 minutes, 21,000 riders projected by 2040, $2 billion, likely opening in 2032, and with it, the Gold Line coming in from Washington County will likely share the stations at 5th and 6th Streets and other destinations. Mostly the CAB meeting had several items of discussion, if you will, information items. And there were 2 primary ones. One was the regional solicitation before and after, and that's done by Katie White, whom I'm sure you know from Metropolitan Council Transit Services. Katie presented, it's a before and after study. The primary purpose is to show what do we get for the money we spent. And it's going to be broken down into roadway, transit, bike ped, and HSIP, the Highway Safety Improvement Plan. And it's going to track projects from 2007 through 2014. So there'll be a sampling, 45 for roadway, 25 for transit, et cetera. And there's not enough data for 2018. But again, the purpose is to show, here's what we spent, what did we get for it? And this will obviously help future regional solicitations and cost-benefit analysis. Under the roadway section, they'll concentrate on safety and congestion. Transit is what's the increase in ridership. And I learned, which I did not know, that it takes approximately 3 years for riders to get into the transit riding habit. Mr. Lamb, you know far better than I. Bike pedestrian, it will concentrate on safety, miles, connectivity, and density of destination, meaning what is the cluster that this is serving, jobs, schools, recreation, et cetera. And of course, HSIP on safety. And a new, and Joe Barbeau and Cole Hineker are here, so perhaps they could speak to it, but an unusual thing that they're doing is a peer review of other MPOs, like size MPOs, to find out their best practices. And the key, again, is the correlation between the projects and the outcome. The other information item, and part of it I'm going to defer to Director Thompson, were the funding scenarios for the regional solicitation. And this is just a quick graphic of the different things that the staff put together. Miraculously, from the appeals process on Thursday, they had this done for Monday morning with everything redone with the appeals included, and also for funding for a program called Our Car, which I'll let Director Thompson refer to. As you know, in the funding scenarios, there are base with expansion heavy, base with bike pedestrian heavy. And the tab asked that there be one more model included, and that's base with reconstruction and modernization heavy. And to refresh from last year, approximately $600,000 is going to be coming off the top for the travel behavior inventory. In regarding to the electric vehicle project, more commonly known as Our Car, as in the 1 hour, Russ Stark, Mr. Stark, from the former city council member, now member of Melvin, Mr. Mayor Carter's environmental policy team, spoke to that. And the questions Tab has is on the uniqueness and the funding. And again, I will defer certainly to Director Thompson if there are any further comments. Thank you all.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Peter?
And thank you for the
Mr.
ride,
Dugan, sorry.
Mr. Lamb. I'm sorry. I'm so impressed with your people. Wow. Gentlemen, saved the life. Gee. I'm glad I don't think I'd get hired. Thank you.
As Mr. Dugan was speaking,
I'm sorry.
I wrote Nick a note. We'll make sure to get the funding scenarios sent out to all of you so you can see where it's at. There was a little bit of discussion. Washington County felt that they had not gotten as much percentage funded compared to their population, but they also didn't submit a lot of projects. So there was immediate discussion about regional balance and some discussion about going expansion heavy based on that Washington County would get more projects funded. And there was also comments, including mine, that expansion heavy was in conflict with the transportation policy plan, which is more preservation mode because of lack of funding for our system, our current system. Yes, Mr.
Madam Chair,
Dugan.
thank you for reminding me. I did omit that. One of the aspects, or one of the suggestions from Washington County, is to have the projects awarded to them equal to the funds of their population growth. So as counties grow, and if perhaps they're 8% of the population served, they should get 8% of the money. That was a suggestion that was floated. But I'm sure, as you know, the analysis over the several years have shown that it's pretty balanced among all project types, all scenarios, and all geographic areas.
Are there any other questions? Very good. Thank you so much. Next up is MTS Director Thompson's report.
Madam Chair and members, just a little bit follow up on that tab action. I'll send out the scenarios. We're adding this fourth scenario, this modernization scenario this week, so I'll wait till that's part of the package so you get the full complete. And what you'll see is 4 scenarios and then 4 other scenarios that include this Our Car proposal in it, which is listed as St. Paul. And that project is asking for $6.7 or $6.5 million. So the other 4 scenarios reflect what projects would come off if that project's funded. So really, TAB's going to be looking at 8 scenarios in December, essentially, and then narrowing that down to a recommendation to 1 in January. So it's moving forward, and I think some good suggestions were at this last meeting. Other things upcoming, tomorrow is the last meeting of the Governor's Advisory Council on Connected and Autonomous Vehicles. They'll be reviewing the recommendations that go forward to the governor, and right after the meeting, I think December 1st, they submit the report. The draft recommendations focus on where Minnesota should be in leadership position, setting some clear policy and over testing and oversight, and really having some clarity brought at the legislative level that to allow for that, and how the state agencies or cities would have some oversight. securing funding for infrastructure, a lot of focus on public education, building trust, and understanding of what these technologies can bring for benefits, but also what their limitations are. Focus on partnership, and lastly, really a strong recommendation around equity. Ensure that it's the people of Minnesota and our policies and objectives that are first, and then how this technology can support what we want to do in the state. So, good recommendations, and I'll forward that report when it is completed. The next steps for automated vehicles for the council is that you'll be receiving invites for scenario planning workshops that occur at the 5th Wednesday in January. And that'll be an invitation to council, to TAB, to cities and counties and other stakeholders. We're running a series of workshops over different times so that there's a lot of opportunities you can attend. And then for the new council, we have a 4th workshop that we're holding until possibly the new council, new TAB, and other members are seated later in the spring. And then those scenarios will feed some of our planning processes. The travel behavior inventory is making strong progress in recruiting respondents. We started in October. We already have 1,100 surveys completed, so more than we expected at this time. Our goal is to have 7,500 surveys by next October, and it's looking really positive that we'll easily meet that goal. Lastly, I'll state that there's an upcoming annual Freight and Logistics Forum. It'll be the 21st annual on December 7th. At a hotel in Minneapolis. I can forward that information. They'll be focusing on cybersecurity and technology in logistics. And then they'll have the Minnesota MFAC will meet after that, and we'll be presenting some about our planning studies and how they affect freight, particularly our freeway interchange study. So that's December 7th, an all-day affair. If you're interested in attending, I can send you information on that. With that, that concludes my report. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No? General Manager Lamb.
Yes, Madam Chair, members, first of all, Becky may have said that the Wi-Fi is a little spotty today. You say, why is that? Well, the fact of the matter is it ties back to a break-in that occurred late last week here. Somebody entered through the construction site and through our fire door that we have between our main building and our construction site, did a considerable amount of damage, if you will, to our small starts office, just this side of the break room, and then went in the break room and treated themselves. We do believe the investigation's underway. Staff has been diligent in kind of cleaning up and assessing what, if anything, is missing or whatever. And so, getting back to the Wi-Fi, we are installing some additional cameras internal to the building that we didn't have kind of on the plan this early, but we've reviewed kind of what we needed to do to improve security, and so that's why the Wi-Fi is now spotty till we get that all located. So, but speaking of photos, I want to bring up a photo, and we'll be talking about more about our efforts to expand and improve our bus shelters later in the meeting. But I wanted to highlight 2 other ways we're making waiting experience better for the customers. First, our customers will see a subtle but important change to the schedules that appear on our shelters when service changes take effect this December 1st. Rather than showing the time point arrival closest to that shelter, usually upstream 3 to 5 minutes, it will actually give the arrival time that's scheduled for that location, since we now have the schedules down to that level of detail. So it'll really give the customers a better sense of when's it coming to my location. So that, in addition to the second one, and you'll see a picture of this, as you know, the last couple of years as we've expanded the use of heat in our shelters, we've also seen a growth in vandalism. And there are various ways that individuals vandalize, and one of them is they can use like snow to throw up against these heating elements and kind of knock them out, but also the heating elements themselves is an attractive source of vandalism. So our staff have come up with a new design to kind of help protect that, but still provide the needed heat, and so they're installing them on shelters throughout the system. Next, I want to let you know that we're scheduling open houses on the E-line. We'll be inviting feedback on the plans to bring rapid bus service to Hennepin Avenue at 2 upcoming open houses. Plans for the E-line, which will largely replace Route 6, will be shared on Monday, December 10th at the Pershing Rec Center and on Thursday, December 13th at the Marcy Open School. Both open houses will run from like 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. We don't plan to have presentations, so people are invited to just come at any time. The staff will be there and kind of walk through the original plans, if you will. And one objective of the open houses is to get feedback on routing options for the north and the south ends of the E-line. We're also putting together a community advisory committee that will provide input on key decisions. Applications to serve on that committee are being accepted through December 20th, so if you happen to know anybody who lives or works in that area, please let them know about that and more information on our website. And finally, a photo of 3 turkeys outside the door of a Route 9 bus in Minnetonka quickly spread online last week. The caption contest on our Facebook page generated more than 1,400 clever responses. In the end, we chose this one to put the submission at the head of the table. And the winning submission says, "This bus is stuffed. We'll have to wait for the next one." We'll also be seeing the usual outpouring of interest on our holiday buses and trains, which went into effect this last week, the week before Thanksgiving. And if you happen to catch one, we encourage you to take a photo and share it on social media. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. My other favorite caption was, "Their escape plan was foiled because they didn't have exact change." Are there any questions for General Manager Lamb? All right. Next up is our consent item agenda. Is there a motion to approve, or are there any questions on any of the items?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent item is approved. First up on non-consent is 2018-270, and Sharon Feiner is here to present, and Bruce Howard. Or just Bruce Howard.
Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. Yes, sorry to disappoint you. Sharon is a little under the weather today, so I will be handling this item by myself. And this is, as you mentioned, item 218-270, arterial bus rapid transit branding recommendations. And you might consider this business item as really unfinished business from our work that we put in on the regional transitway guidelines from about 6 or 7 years ago. Some of you, I think, remember that, were involved in those discussions. But if you look at the regional transitway guidelines today, we spell out a lot of the requirements for the transitway guidelines, things like station area spacing and service, frequency, and branding, and we talk about how that applies to LRT and BRT, highway BRT, and so on. And for arterial BRT, though, we have a TBD, meaning to be determined. So the recommendations that we're putting before you today would fill that slot. A little bit of background for you in terms of benefits of branding the transitways. Why did we decide to brand transitways differently than our other Metro Transit services back a few years ago? As I mentioned, well, here's some of those reasons. We wanted to clearly differentiate the type of transit service that our transitways are going to be offering from our local and express bus service. We wanted to communicate consistency for services that extend beyond one county or one area and could be operated by multiple providers. Back when we were looking at this, we thought there might be multiple providers operating these BRT services, and we wanted to have consistency across those providers. Hasn't turned out quite that way, as Metro Transit is going to be operating most of these, but in the future that might change. Increases the ease of use for our customers and creates loyal customers with the consistency of the delivery tied to that particular branding. And as many of you may recall, These are the previously approved regional transitway guidelines as they pertain to our branding framework here. And I won't go through these in too much detail, but again, just as a reminder, this is what was approved by the council back in 2011, 2012. Position, brand, and identify our LRT and highway BRT services as one system. Unify the LRT and highway BRT services brand using a distinct system name, and of course that name is Metro, which you see on our LRVs, on the red line buses, but you don't see them on the A line buses yet, or that C line bus if you happen to be on the tour here just a little bit ago. That would be what we're doing today, is to incorporating arterial bus rapid transit into that Metro brand. Apply the regional transit color scheme to LRT and HBRT services. And when I talk about the regional transit color scheme, that's our colors, the red, the blue, the yellow, the white, that Metro Transit uses, but also Metro Mobility uses it, as well as other council services. And then, as I mentioned, what we didn't do 6 or 7 years ago was give those specific branding decisions to ABRT. At that point, the first ABRT line was still about 4 or 5 years away, and so we thought we'd get to that a little bit down the road, and that's kind of where we are today. So with the A line already in operation and C line opening shortly, we need to formalize how we're going to brand our arterial bus rapid transit services going forward. And as I mentioned, those are the recommendations that are before you today. Let me briefly talk about those. We did have some internal meetings. We did have a couple of meetings with our stakeholder partners from around the region, and we did conduct a couple of focus groups with customers as well. And essentially, this is what came out of that work. And these recommendations here then would be to position, brand, and identify ABRT as part of the existing Metro system of LRT and HBRT services. So again, this is something that we don't do today. We'll be moving the A line, C line, and all of the other ABRT services that come in the future under this Metro brand. And why would we do this? Well, here's the main reasons. First of all, it puts all of our premium service, and when I say premium service, fast and frequent service, under one brand so it's easy to understand. It extends the reach of the Metro system by adding potentially 11 lines or more to what is right now our LRT and highway BRT services only. So it's really a stronger, more robust Metro system, and the map that you saw there I think indicates and shows that. The ABRT corridors are high potential ridership areas and really need equal branding importance with LRT and highway BRT and dedicated BRT. And finally, from a marketing standpoint, this really is the simplest way for us to approach it as opposed to creating a whole nother separate brand for arterial bus rapid transit. The second point here, name ABRT lines using letter designation, is something that we're already doing today. This would be just formalizing that in the regional transitway guidelines, and then, as I mentioned, applying the regional transit color scheme as well to vehicles, stations, signage, and so on. So that would be the policy piece of this. Wanted to talk just for a minute then how this may actually come about and how it will be implemented. So here you see an overview of our regional transit branding matrix. So again, as I mentioned, approval today of these recommendations moves our ABRT under the Metro brand. At the top there you'll see, so essentially this creates kind of a super brand for our LRT and our BRT services, groups them all together. In terms of the brand expression here, as I mentioned, we're going to be moving the Metro logo out to our A line, our C line vehicles. We'll be putting this onto pocket schedules, and we'll be doing a little bit of retrofitting around the stations, although we don't think there's going to be much work there. And from a cost standpoint, we don't anticipate there would be a cost to this, really. This next slide is really just going to be talking about how we're going to step up our marketing of the Metro system. So here's a tagline that we're going to use: fast, frequent, all day, all yours. We're going to continue now to really hone in and start to focus on the benefits of the Metro system in front of the C line opening up. So in the coming months, we'll be more aggressive with marketing this and this new tagline. Again, we'll emphasize some of these shared attributes of all the Metro lines. So fast, frequent, all day, that's the big thing we want people to associate with this. Enhanced stations and real-time signs across all of those lines. Faster boarding and off-platform fare payment, time savings of up to 25% for all of these lines. And of course, simplicity and connectivity of the metro system is going to be key. So those are some of the messages that we'll be talking about from a marketing perspective. And then finally, this last slide here is just to give you visual of kind of what this metro system could become. And this is exciting, isn't it, to see our twin cities with all of these lines. And so this really is kind of a depiction of what's in the transportation policy plan, current revenue funding scenario, either existing or to be built out. So with that, Madam Chair, I will conclude and try to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Bruce? Councilmember Hunt?
Madam Chair, Bruce, this makes complete sense to me. I've finally gotten myself away from talking about Hiawatha and Central to talking about the colors. The only piece that seems to confuse people, though, is the orange line. People think blue line, green line, light rail. Orange line is BRT, so why doesn't it have a letter instead of a color? That seems to confuse people, and so people often say to me, well, is it orange line because eventually it's going to be light rail? Does that make sense, Bruce? I mean, people seem to be confused about the orange line. Why is it a color instead of...
Yeah, Madam Chair, Council Member, I think, you know, as you can see here on the map, one of the things we did and what we heard is to try and group the like with like. In other words, all the rail on one side, all the BRT on the other side. And then as you look at the BRT portion of that, though, you'll see, right, some of them have colored names, some of them have lettered names. What we found from talking to customers is, that doesn't matter that much to most customers. Now, some people it does matter, and with that, you know, we gave them the little kind of footnote there that talked about those that have colored lines are going to have designated lanes, those that have letters are going to have mixed traffic with signal priority. So also, so we're hoping that that helps with that a little bit in terms of clarifying that it, you know, it operates a certain way. But one of the things that we found too is that we wanted to make it clear that, you know, these are rail and these are bus. And so this map will hopefully try to do that. And there'll be other places as well.
Are there councilmember comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of comments. I first just want to say that I think this is really consistent with, I think, one of the real strengths of Metro Transit's approach overall, which is a really deliberate approach to managing a brand and managing the identification of the package of services that we're providing using a very kind of customer-driven approach, and I totally appreciate that. I certainly support this this recommendation and you know, moving forward with the branding framework. I have one concern, which is that I have some concerns about the long-term prospects for the local bus network. And I see this playing out sort of in my own part of the region, and I see it playing out more broadly where there are local routes that people rely on, and diminishing ridership in the bus mode overall, both in this region and nationally, is going to put more and more pressure on that part of the system. And that's not in conflict with moving forward with this rebranding or this branding framework, but I think there is the possibility that as we continue to build this strong brand around the Transitways and the rapid network, that I want to make sure we maintain similar focus on continuing to build and consolidate the brand of the local network too, because that's so critical. And maybe it's not always the show horse, but it is the workhorse, and it's reliable and it's safe and it's, you know, reasonably priced and it's a good experience. So just want to make that comment. Thank you for the presentation.
Are there other questions or comments? Thank you, Councilmember Commerce. I think that's really well stated, and I would agree. I am very excited about the branding, and I think I love the tagline, and I think this is what a lot of folks are demanding and moving towards, but our local bus also fulfills a really critical need, and so having branding that reflects that is important as well. So thank you. I heartily concur. Are there any other, General Manager Lamb?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Commerce, and all council members, I think it is important to make sure that we are staying focused on the local bus service. And indeed, when you talk about kind of what the starts with at the bus stop, taking the mystery out of it. But really what you're going to see over the course of the next several years is an increased focus on frequency, on the high productivity routes. And that's where we're taking I have to plan my life around transit versus transit will be there when I need it. And so you're going to see an improvement on those kind of core local routes along higher use corridors. But we're going to probably see some reshaping of what we'll call coverage networks. So in the lower density neighborhoods and those kinds of things, that's where the partnerships where with new types of shared mobility will be kind of experimented with, and perhaps you're going to see a little bit less of a extensive network of branches for the core system, but the reinvestment on that in core local routes, I think, is where you're going to see the offset.
Councilmember Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate that, Brian, and I actually think what you just described is in itself, there are elements in there of, there are opportunities to strengthen that local brand based on what you just said, that, you know, there is an ongoing, really thoughtful process of thinking about route configurations, et cetera, that I think in some cases don't totally meet the eye for the public, and yet that goes on. I often talk with stakeholders about the importance and the value of that process, and the fact that the system is always being kind of further developed and refined, et cetera, at the local scale. So I just want to make that response. Thank you for your comment.
Are there other questions or comments?
Move approval. Second.
First and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. Good discussion. Next up is 2018, no, I'm doing consent, sorry. 2018-323 Armored Transport Services Contract. Dennis Borchak is here to present. Welcome.
Madam Chair, council members, I'm Dennis Stewart, Manager of Revenue Operations in Metro Transit. I'm going to be discussing business item 2018-323. The proposed action for this item is that the Metropolitan Council approve the contract for an armored transport securities for $2.96 million over a period of 5 years. Okay, a little bit of background. Although Metro Transit, we heavily promote our online ticketing, our go-to card sales. Our go-to card sales are over 60% right now, but we still collect about $25 million annually in cash from the ticket vending machines and from our bus fare boxes. Majority of this cash is from transit-dependent and special event customers. We've been fortunate in the past to have safe and secure transport with our armored car services, and we are looking forward to continuing this type of service. It's the safest way to move our cash around is with armored car contracts. Over the past several months, Revenue Processing Department and Metro Transit, we reviewed all of our cash operations, including our armored security contract, and we hosted a bidders conference. We invited all the armored contractors from the metropolitan area. We had a lot of participation, and we reviewed our scope of work, and we improved it. As a result of this improvement, we ended up with a competitive bid from Star Security, which is in line with the standard market rates over a 5-year period of this contract. And we have experience with Star Security. They're a good contractor. They provided good service with us for the last 4 years. So our staff is recommending that the regional administrator authorize the contract with Star Security. Madam Chair, members, I'm open to any comments or questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? I actually have a question. It may be more for General Manager Lamb. I found out, this is word of mouth, but another system actually surveyed folks to see why they were using cash, because it's the most expensive way for us to process payment. And it was not because they were unbanked. It was because folks had forgotten their go-to card, or whatever the equivalent is. And I'm just wondering if we've ever done any kind of study to look at it so that we can encourage even more people to go to card or whatever electronic payment.
Madam Chair, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think we've ever really surveyed our customer base in terms of their willingness. But as you can see, even though in your own life over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, there is a growing appetite for kind of moving towards cashless. And in fact, as we even think about moving forward with our next fare policy, that's another one of those options about how you create incentives, because your point is correct, that it is costly behind the scenes to handle cash. But I don't see that in the course of the 5-year period we're awarding this particular contract that we would completely transition. But I think that the suggestion of going out and getting a better marker, if you will, for our customer base willingness to move towards alternatives to cash, I think is a good ongoing kind of sense of appetite.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. Next up is 2018-306 amendment to the Orange Line 2017 funding agreement with Ctib, and Christina Morrison is here.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Christina Morrison. I'm the project manager for Metro Orange Line BRT. The proposed action today is to authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute Amendment 3 to Agreement 16I-092 with Hennepin County, increasing the grantor's participation from $14.45 million to $15.109 million, and extending the grant activity period through December 31st of 2019. So a little bit of background on this. This funding agreement was originally executed between Met Council and Ctib in 2017, and then it was amended in 2018 to provide Orange Line project funding through Hennepin County after Ctib's dissolution. Hennepin County has prepared a final payment of Ctib funding stemming from that dissolution in the amount of $695,000. This action would effectively allow Hennepin County to disperse this final payment to the project for use on 2019 project activities.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
Madam Chair, I'll move the motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right. The next 3 items, we have a presentation, and Robin Kaufman and Kelsey will be here to present.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Robin Kaufman. I'm the Director of TSD Administration for the Light Rail Projects, and I'm here today to present these first 3 items. First of all, I'm going to be providing the quarterly right-of-way update through November of 2018. I'll also be presenting a business item for a contract amendment and also an SPO lease amendment. And then Kelsey will be presenting the final item. So maybe to get started, I'll present an update on the right-of-way process. Good news is that we are very well positioned. We will have property acquired that our contractors will now be able to work on. So If you can see here, there are actually two little orange circles still buried under there that are in process, but otherwise, by the end of this week, we will have acquired rights to 151 of our 153 privately owned parcels. So that's great news. We do have two that are remaining, and one will be closing or finalizing the settlement on January 2nd, and then we have another one that's out in the spring. So it's very good news to be that far along. And then we're also fairly well along with our relocation. Or actually, I should highlight, we do have one that the offer is accepted. It's parcel 424 Hopkins Tech Center that we're going to be finalizing on January 2nd. And then we have one where it's still in the appraisal process, and I'll be making out the offer here shortly. So the relocation status, we're also making progress on this. A lot of the tenants are in the last parcel, Hopkins Tech Center. So by the end of next month, most of these tenants will be relocated. But you can see that we have most of the businesses have vacated or relocated, and almost all of the storage tenants have relocated. So. Like I said, a few left to go, but they're all in the one building that, primarily in the one building that we have yet to acquire on January 2nd. So that's my relocation and acquisition update. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or otherwise I'll jump into the business items. Okay, great. So with that kind of as background, we are requesting a contract amendment to WSB's contract. They are one of the relocation specialists that we contracted with back in 2015, and they've the 7 contractors have been working diligently on working with the tenants and making sure that they are moving out and finding relocation and being able to process their claims in a timely manner. We did do one amendment, if you recall, back in February of 2018, and that was to amend 6 of the 7 contracts to extend a little bit, just because we had found an increase in number of tenants, and so we went from 100 to 170, so we did have to increase the amounts then. We did a second amendment in June of 2018 to one of the contracts because there was one tenant that was having some challenges with their relocation, so it was just taking some additional time. And so now what we're requesting is a third amendment to WSB. They are the contractor that's working with about 100 displacees on parcel 424, the Hopkins Tech Center. And so because we had originally planned on acquiring and closing on that property sometime mid-2018, but because that got pushed out to January 2019, they've just had to have a lot more communications and coordination with those tenants just to answer their questions about timeline and availability. And so because of that, they've requested, or we've needed to amend their contract to be able to make sure that they're able to finalize those claims and continue to communicate with the tenants in this last month or so. So with that, we're requesting a $35,000 contract amendment. And again, this is time critical, and so we are requesting a sole source just because they have been working with these 100 or so displacees. They know them, they've got their Rolodex of contact information. So just because it's time critical, we are asking for that sole source amendment. So here's just a summary table that shows the previously amended contracts, and then you can see that second line with WSP Associates, where we'd be increasing their contract by $35,000 for a total of $250,000. I'll also mention, too, that we have done a survey and looked very closely at the other contractors and the amount of work that they have left, knowing that most of the tenants are now out, and so their primary goal is to finish relocation, basically finish the claims, because a lot of the tenants are already out. And so we do feel that the remaining balance on those contracts are sufficient, so we're not requesting amendments for those. And so with that, we are requesting a recommendation that the regional administrator approve a sole source contract amendment for the property owner and tenant service advisory services with WSB to increase the contract amount by $35,000 for a total contract amount of $250,000. I'd be happy to answer any questions
or comments?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
We have one more? I was just going to take them in order and have them keep presenting as we take the votes, if that's okay. All right? Okay. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Sorry. If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
2018-322 is approved. Next up, we'll move to the next presentation. Okay?
The next item I'm presenting is the Southwest Project Office lease amendment. Back in February of 2012, we executed a lease for basically the 5th floor of Park Place West, and that lease was to go through July 31st of 2019. That's when we had anticipated a revenue start date of early 2019. And that lease at that time was not to exceed about $3.6 million. In November of 2014, with the start of engineering, we amended the lease to add about half of the 6th floor, about 12,000 square feet, and that accommodated 38 workstations for our engineering consultants through the engineering process. And that lease was also up on July 31st of 2019 and did add about $1.6 million to the lease for that space. Since engineering has been mostly concluded and the engineering team has dwindled down a little bit more, they've been all able to fit back on 5th floor. But in 2017, we started to hire our construction staff, and so they've been taking up the space on 6th floor. But now with the receipt of the limited or letter of no prejudice from the FTA and the award of the civil contract, our majority of our construction staff will be moving out into the field offices in 2019. So we no longer will need that space up on the 6th floor. And so we did approach the property manager, and they expressed interest, or said that they would be willing to release the 6th floor with no penalty in February, and at a savings of about $145,000. And so we are requesting an amendment. First of all, we do need the space for longer since our revenue start date is now in 2023. So we do need to amend the contract or amend the lease to extend out to the end of 2013. So we need to extend the time. On the 5th floor, we would like to terminate the lease on the 6th floor, and that would add a net increase of about $2.8 million. So we're requesting authorization for the regional administrator to execute a lease agreement with our property manager to terminate the lease on the 6th floor, extend the lease on the 5th floor, and for a total lease not to exceed $7.875 million. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? I'll just make a, thank you. Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'll just make a brief observation that both these items demonstrate staff's nimbleness given the uncertain timeframes that we were facing. And so again, thank you for all your good work on this and being able to manage the budget as best you could given the circumstances. Thank you. If there's no further discussion, Councilmember Went.
Madam Chair, Robin, the St. Louis Park location has proven really effective. When we had community advisory committee meetings there, people were coming corridor wide, and that seemed to be the central location that was most convenient for everybody. So thank you for the wise choice of St. Louis Park.
Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Kelsey.
And I will turn it over to Kelsey.
All right. Madam Chair, members, I'm Kelsey Campbell. I'm the Environmental Project Manager for the Southwest Project Office, and I'm here to present business item 2018-211. The proposed action is that the Met Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a contract for wetland technical support for the Southwest LRT project in an amount not to exceed $695,618 to Kimley Horn and Associates. For some background, the purpose of the contract is to provide technical support during construction to ensure compliance with wetland permit requirements, including the U.S. Army Corps Section 404 permit, as well as local permits. The consultant will provide oversight of the civil contractor during construction in and near wetland areas, and then post-construction will take over vegetation establishment and maintenance monitoring for a period of up to 5 years. The council received 4 proposals, and an evaluation panel recommended Kimley Horn, and then a negotiation team worked with the consultant to reach the price listed above and completed a cost analysis. And with that, staff recommends we move forward with recommending to award the contract to Kimley Horn. And I'd welcome any questions.
Move approval. Support. Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Munt.
Madam Chair, 8 years ago, when we got in a van and we looked at the alignment for Southwest, I was blown away by the number of wetlands, and with the numerous public hearings that we've had, protection of water quality has been foremost in people's minds. So I think this is a really wise investment.
We moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next up is 2018-318. It's a TIP amendment, and Joe Barbeau is here to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm here to discuss or to share with you item 218-318. This is a TIP amendment request from MnDOT to concur with TAB's action that amends the 2019 through 22 Transportation Improvement Program to add a project reconstructing and expanding Interstate 94 in Wright County. Me saying Wright County might raise your eyebrows. Wright County is part of the expanded metropolitan area per the 2010 regional solicitation, and as such, projects in a small part of Wright and Sherburne County must be included in our transportation improvement program. So for background, this amendment is needed to add the new transportation, added a project to the TIP that was awarded in the MnDOT's 2018 Corridors of Commerce program. You might remember that program awarding a few projects for to foster economic growth. It's a competitive award program that I think it was awarded this summer, but we could not put it into the TIP until it made it into a transportation policy plan. So like I said, the project is in Wright County, and that's it. That's all I need from you.
Are there any questions or comments?
I move adoption, Madam Chair. Oh, so I didn't see your hand.
That's okay. I can comment now, or I can comment later.
Councilmember Latofsky.
So I am going to vote against this, and I'm sure it's going to pass anyway, but one of my constituents raised some questions and concerns about it. It's kind of out of the process and not necessarily what we should be investing in the region. So I just want to explain my no vote.
Okay. There's a motion, and we don't have a second yet. Is there any other comments? We have a second. Any other comments?
Madam Chair, maybe I could at least comment for your benefit. For a number of years, it was the federal government who expanded our boundaries. I'm going to talk like a layperson here, not like an engineer and the rest of you technical people. But the federal government said we had to expand our area, and that included those 2 counties. And so they weren't necessarily happy either. I mean, they were nervous about the big guys down in the cities taking over whatever they need. But they're very, we've been to a number of meetings. Katie and I have gone up there. The first couple of meetings, I got to meet some of the local folks, local county commissioners and the like, and city folks. And they feel pretty happy about getting this Corridors of Commerce money. So, I have no problems about supporting this wholeheartedly.
Councilmember.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think generally people in most of greater Minnesota weren't happy about this, and people in the metro weren't really happy about this.
Could be. Are there any other comments or questions? I can say the folks that are in Wright and Sherburne are very happy about it. Yes, they are. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Aye. Next up is 2018-325. It's the same week item. It's the release of the public comment draft for the 2040 TPP amendment for Riverview.
Good afternoon, council members. Chair Rodriguez gets to hear my joke twice, but we went 4 years without amending the last TPP, and you went 1 month. And we're asking you to amend the new TPP. So
We knew it was
we had an information item on this in, I think it was last month. Mike Rogers, staff here from Ramsey County, presented about the project, so we're not going to go into details about the Riverview Corridor. Just going to speak to the action item today. What this action is going to do is propose that we release the amendment to the Transportation Policy Plan for public comment. That public comment period would be from November 29th to January 21st, so it would start after the council meeting on Wednesday. And a public hearing would be scheduled for January 9th, which is a council meeting at 4 p.m. Just one thing I wanted to also cover, the attachment. We made this an attachment. The website will be ready by Thursday, but as for now, we're going to have the attachment be the action. So the attachment is a new format for amendments. I discussed it briefly when we did the information item, but generally speaking, this new approach tries to put all the information on the amendment in one document as opposed to redlining multiple sections of the plan. So we think this is a little bit more clear and easy to follow for the public in order to figure out what's being changed and what's the impact to the plan. And so the amendment goes through what the project is, the details, and then the impacts to the plan, both federal requirements like air quality and environmental considerations, and then the performance of the plan and how it's affected by this adding of this project. And so that new format is, I think it's about 9 pages, including 2 updated maps that show Riverview as now part of the funded long-range plan. And this would be a standalone document that will be posted on the website, kind of in the same relation to the existing plan that was adopted a month ago. So just another quick background piece. As we had talked about previously, there's a couple of actions that Ramsey County did, so we want to give them credit for preparing all this. They had a policy advisory committee that recommended this project. They had resolutions of support from all affected local governments. They provided us with a financial plan for this project to be constructed and operated by 2032. And then they gave us a locally preferred alternative report that documented all of the efforts they went through to get to this step and documented the substantial public outreach and the comments that they got on the project. Recognizing this is not the last phase of the project, so there's a lot of work ahead, but this is a pretty major milestone, and just ask that if someone were to like to consider a motion to release the LPA for public comment.
Are there any questions or comments from committee members? Councilmember Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move approval, and I just want to say that this is, I think, the last chapter of a very lengthy series of chapters of work on this corridor, and really I find it very gratifying that with the county's leadership that it seems like all of the parties are aligned and really ready to take the next steps, which I think is a very high opportunity corridor, and it's going to mean a lot of real benefits for the region and its residents. So pleased to move it.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Cole. If it is okay with the committee, we can put all of the items on consent with the exception of the same week item, which is the TPP amendment. And I will also ask Councilmember Latowski, you voted no on the 2018 TIP amendment. Are you comfortable with that on consent, or would you like to pull that off on non-consent?
We can put it on consent. Thank you for asking.
Okay. So only 8. First information item is Better Bus Stops 2018 highlights, and Barry Farrington is here to present. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm Pauline.
Good afternoon.
Chair, committee member, council members, committee members. I'm Paul Lamb. I'm a project manager in the Engineering Facilities Group.
I'm Barry Farrington. I'm a planner in Engineering and Facilities as well.
And we're here to give you an update on the Better Bus Stops program. And that is, as some of you might remember, it's an ongoing multi-year program or project to improve bus stops in order to enhance access to jobs, education, and services. And also part of it is doing community community engagement and finding out what the community members, both people in the affected neighborhoods and customers, think makes them better bus stop and what would encourage them to use transit more often. And then the focus of this program is in the areas shown in the map, areas of concentrated poverty or neighborhoods with areas of concentrated poverty and high populations of color. In terms of shelter progress for this year, we've been able to add 23 new shelters at bus stops that haven't had shelters before, bringing us to 125 to date against our project totals of 150, but also increasing the number of sheltered bus stops in the Metro Transit service area to 1,127. And then we've also, in addition to putting new shelters out, we've been expanding or enhancing shelters, high ridership shelters that are already in place, making improvements of adding light and in some cases heat to 21 of those shelters, bring us to 64 against the project goal of 75. And most of these improvements have been in Minneapolis and St. Paul. There have been some in Richfield and Brooklyn Center this year. And we have been working on this all year. The pictures show work back in the spring of this year when there was still snow on the ground through the summer and into the fall. These pictures show work both underground, putting in electrical conduits and cabling to be able to get electricity to these shelters, and then also concrete work both for the pads where a shelter might go, and in some cases ADA pads to assist with boarding, but then also improving some of the sidewalks around these improved shelters. And then the picture in the middle, as we talked last year, to try and get more shelters out in areas, we've used a smaller shelter, a slimmer shelter that's 2 feet deep. This particular one is kind of an enhancement even to that. During the Cultural and Historic Review Service or assessment we had to go through to get money from the federal government, they'd identified a couple of locations of historic properties or buildings or properties listed on the National Register of Historic Places or eligible properties that they wanted to see bronze shelters or dark brown shelters put in so it wouldn't detract from the appearance and any historical properties from that. So we've been able to order some of those, get those in this year. So the slim shelters have greatly helped us get more shelters out there. There's still been 30 or more sites that we've looked at where there are boardings high enough where we look at shelters, where even that 2 feet deep shelter doesn't provide enough space within the existing right-of-way. We've been contacting property owners to see if that's possible to use some of their property or put the shelter on some of their property to allow those to go in. So that's been a little bit of an impediment. And then we've also, some roadway authorities have had concerns about sightline obstructions from shelters going in at intersections, cross-street traffic not being able to get a good view of the oncoming or the traffic on the major way, and having concerns just about the safety of that. But with the construction projects and with a lot of work from our facilities and maintenance staff, we have been able to get a number of shelters out there this year.
So in addition to shelters in that specific geography, we've also just been doing system-wide improvements for bus stops. Shelters aren't the only thing we can do for a bus stop. This year we finished replacing all 12,000 plus signs at bus stops. So that photo there shows that each unique bus stop identifier number is on the sign. It shows the routes that are served. This bus stop also has a decal, that dark blue there placed around that Route 553 shows that that's a drop-off only. And so our team's been able to test out different ways to use the information that's on the signs. Some of them will have a temporary red line through that will show if a route is on detour, for example. In addition, our shelters are getting new transit information posters. That photo shows the improvements to that design. It's a larger font, so easier to see, includes maps. It has more accurate schedule information for that particular location, so that's a new enhancement. We have a lot of advertising shelters in our system that were inherited from a previous ad company that got out of the shelter business, and our team continues to make progress in replacing those over time. We have about 75 left to go. And also adding those ADA pads that Paul mentioned, that's concrete that meets the front door of the bus. And so it's a way to improve a bus stop that wouldn't have so much ridership to need a shelter, but all bus stops should have that surface. We did do this year of community engagement process, and we just want to reflect on how that continues to be of use to us, not just for bus stops, but for projects like the Sea Line or Route 2 service was improved for speed and reliability. We continue to reach into that information that we got through that year of conversation with community groups. And our agency is getting lifted up, frankly, as a good example of how to do community engagement and how to use that information and how to do better with bus stops. This is a report from the Transit Center Foundation that we're highlighted in, so that's kind of a nice way to see the work. We used that community engagement work to update our shelter placement guidelines. That was the primary goal of that year. And so just as a reminder, our highest priority now is looking at bus stops with 100 or more boardings and places that would serve people who may especially need a shelter for access to transit, bus stops near hospitals, healthcare clinics, etc. And we look for a minimum of 30 boardings per day to consider placing a shelter. So for the coming year, we look forward to achieving those goals that Paul mentioned of getting 150 additional shelters, improving 75 existing, continue to replace those old shelters, improve ADA access, and grow transit shelter access for customers. We have this new metric that I wanted to share with you where we know about 10% of our 12,000 plus bus stops have shelter, but when we think about that from a people perspective, we see that 60% of our transit customer boardings happen where there is shelter. So it's not really our goal to have more and more and more shelters, it's our goal to best serve our customers. So that's something we're tracking now annually. Thank you, and we're happy to take any questions.
Councilmember Wachowski. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I got another question from a constituent. I feel like I'm sort of constituent services Kara here about why aren't there emergency phones and alerts inside the bus stations or bus shelters?
Chair and council member, I can talk a little bit about that. We do have emergency telephones on BRT stations and light rail stations. One of the advantages that those have is those have a hardwired communication connection, which allows us to route those calls directly back without an interruption. I think if there's been some preliminary looks, and cell phone service is not reliable enough to really meet those emergency condition needs. So that's why for the standalone bus shelters, we don't have emergency telephones.
Thank you. I'm sure there was an explanation. Councilmember Mudd.
Madam Chair, folks, I'm really proud of the Better Bus Stops campaign, both the process and the outcome. I'm curious, though, with 1,200 bus stops, how many of them have shelters?
Chair and council member, the total number of stops in the Metro Transit area that have shelters is 1,127, so a little under 10%.
Madam Chair, my next question is, given the new guidelines, do we have sufficient funding to place a shelter at every place where it's warranted?
Chair and council members, that would be, we'd have to basically do Better Bus Stops again. So it's another 150 to 200 bus stops we'd need to look at. As Paul mentioned, not all bus stops that maybe meet that boarding threshold have space to put a shelter, and so that's why we don't have a firm number. We don't have site assessments for every bus stop that would meet that 30 or more boardings.
Are there any further questions or comments? Councilmember Schreiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, this is from an old timer. There for a while, there was a proliferation of benches for people to sit on while they wait for the bus. And it says advertising on them usually. And what we found out when I was working at the local unit of government, that they didn't ask any of the local governments if they could place those benches there. There was no permission given, but it looked like it was to the bus service. Are you running into any old benches out there in your work?
Chair and council members, that's a question I also would like to learn more about. It was something that came up through our community engagement work, how important benches are. But there's a private company that puts out ad benches, and I understand that's under an arrangement with the cities, with the municipalities. So they're not supposed to just be anywhere. They need to be in proximity of a bus stop. And then, of course, we have benches out placed by the county or the roadway authority, whoever that may be.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Schreiber, if I might add, that company is U.S. Bench, and we've had a working relationship with them, but they ultimately are a private company that generates ad revenue, and that's kind of where they, but whenever we've had an issue about the exact placement or whatever, they've been very responsive over the years. So we've had a, I think a very healthy working relationship with them.
I don't, Madam Chair, it was not necessarily that healthy years ago, and some of the locals were surprised that the benches even appeared. All of a sudden, magic, there's benches on these corners, and so I'm glad to hear that they're not in the way of your work either.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Schreiber, I want to remind people that the north side of Minneapolis lost its bus shelters when Minneapolis, well-meaning, outsourced shelters from Metro Transit to a private agency. They only put shelters in places where people could buy Rolex watches and Coach purses. And that's when North Minneapolis lost shelters, and that's why we have the disparities that exist today. So I hope that's a lesson that all cities can learn from. The job is better done by Metro Transit, where we're putting shelters where people need them, not where advertisers want them.
Madam Chair, if I could add one thing, though. We do recognize that these are largely at taxpayer expense. So one of the things that you will be seeing is an expansion of our advertising on shelters over the course of the next few years to offset. We did a business model that said we could take over the formerly privately operated, constructed shelters in both Minneapolis and St. Paul and offset that total cost of both constructing and maintenance by expanding our advertising presence. And so that's part of our execution plan over the long run.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Next up is our Ridership Report, and John Harper's here.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. I think that my ridership presentation today is a synthesis of a number of the items that you talked about throughout the meeting, and I'll get going here and present the brief report and talk through a number of key points. So ridership, this is year-to-date ridership for Met Council service through Q3. And overall, the ridership is down for the council by 2% year-to-date. I'll talk in a bit about a couple of the key decreases, a couple of the key areas where we've seen increases in ridership and what that might mean in the context of these other things we've talked about too. I want to point out just one item on this slide, and that is in September there was one fewer weekday in 2018 than there was in 2017. So you can see that tick down at the very last month, but just keep that in mind as you look at that. This slide indicates, as we always indicate, that the key, that most ridership in the council's services are on the local bus network. Second is the light rail service, and express bus then kind of rounds out the top three areas where we have ridership, and our other services fill in the remainder. This drills down a little bit into the numbers, and I'll just point out a couple of places here. As I mentioned, overall, the council ridership is down 2%. Local bus is down 4%. Express is down 8%. We've seen increases in certain areas on LRT and BRT service, And as we've mentioned in previous meetings, Metro Mobility Service continues to increase at about 5 or 6% annually. These are items we've talked about at meetings and at ridership updates for quite some time, so these aren't any changes in trend. As you look at the numbers here, I want to talk about a couple of areas that the strategic initiative folks have pointed out to me. Those are the folks who do much more analysis of the ridership than I do. And so I want to mention that express routes in the 35W construction corridor are down much less, or might in some cases even be up from last year. And so I guess the key here is constrict all of our interstates down to one lane in each direction and we're good to go. We'll push people to our servicing off the highways. That might be an option, but really we have seen reductions of ridership on some of our core local services, but in areas where we've made some significant investments, such as Route 2 in Minneapolis and Route 5464 corridor on the east side of St. Paul, we have seen ridership gains. So that investment has paid off in gains. The other point, or I guess the key point here is, there are industry trends. There are, which is really a reduction in ridership across transit agencies across the country. But areas where we've branded, where we've increased our frequency, our service speed, so on, have been areas where we have done well and have bucked the trends in certain cases. So those points are talked about here, and then I'll make the one last point that I mentioned earlier, and that is Metro Mobility continues to increase, and we do continue to look at ways to move ridership off of our traditional Metro Mobility service onto other alternatives, and those are being researched and investigated and moved forward by our Metro Mobility staff. So those are the points that I have, and I will attempt to take questions if you have them.
Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to express routes, can you just clarify, did you take out the routes that you had eliminated out of that equation, or did you include those previous routes?
Madam Chair and Committee Member McCarthy, the ridership that you see here is based on any service that fits the category at the time. So if a route existed last year and doesn't exist this year, it would have been counted in the ridership number last year and not counted in the ridership number this year, for example, and vice versa. So, I don't know of any specific instances, but we basically take all the ridership in the category and compare it year to year. So the number of trips, the service span on any particular route might change, but we lump it into that category.
So just to further verify it, so therefore, if a route was eliminated, you would see a decrease in number towards that negative 8%.
Madam Chair and Committee Member, that is true, yes.
Councilmember Latowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You say primary industry trend is a primary driver, and a trend doesn't seem to be a driver. It just means to say that we're like not an outlier to other systems. And I'm wondering what we know about this industry trend and why is ridership dropping everywhere.
Sure. Committee Chair and Councilmember Latowski. I can talk a little bit to that, and maybe Mr. Lamb can elaborate on it. I did not intend to say that industry trend was a driver. I was merely suggesting that we are not different than what is being experienced across transit agencies across the country. I think that the car ownership, I think as we've talked about in previous meetings, actually as people become employed and gain better employment, people tend to purchase cars if they can, in some cases, and that is a driver towards ridership decreases. We have cases where the discretionary rides are being taken on other modes. Where we've talked about our frequency and our speed of service being important. I think people are getting more and more used to calling a TNC, for example, and getting a quick response. And strides that we make towards being convenient in that kind of context would be benefit to us. I think those, there are lots more choices for folks all the time. Scooters go by in the downtowns, where people are making choices to take those instead of maybe a short hop bus ride or Lime bikes, all those choices. And I think in some places those become places where we lose ridership, but in some places those are areas where we gain ridership. And I'll give you an example. I know on 6th Street in downtown St. Paul, people will take a bike or a scooter down to the transit corridor and then catch our service, where before I don't know, if they would have walked down or how they would have got down, but I know that they are doing that multimodal choice in some cases. So some of these drive ridership up and down sort of at the same time, so it might be a mixed result. And you've got more.
Madam Chair, council members, I think there's lots of interesting trends here. And one of them is the fact that I think we're seeing a little bit of the correction for express bus. The last 3 years, it was urban local ridership that was by far driving the loss in bus ridership, as opposed to kind of a relatively stable express bus. This year, it's really been what I'll call a correction, if you will. And I think that is related to the ongoing stability of gas prices and some other factors. It's largely a commuter-driven kind of a market, the express market. Having said that, I think one of the things that's really interesting, if you look at overall ridership, it is our big routes that have absorbed the most pure number ridership loss. So it's our high frequency routes. What's really fascinating to me, as you know, a couple of years ago we talked about the impacts of taking those buses off of Nicollet Mall and moving over to Hennepin. We saw twice the ridership loss to the two comparable routes. And when we moved it back, we didn't see the rebound. And so one of the things that continues to vex us is kind of how we can reintroduce people to some of those urban local routes, which again, we're talking about a relative scale of 8% of the total local or regular route ridership on express routes, and compared to the urban local. So the percentage is higher on the express, but really where the loss of ridership has happened on the urban locals. And one of the things we continue to explore is when we're losing that ridership, in what neighborhoods we're losing that ridership. And we have more data to actually support that, to John's earlier point, that later in the evening, tending towards safety and security as being an issue, is one of those things where people have options and are starting to look at those options more closely. So this last year, we didn't do ourselves any favor. Our brand promise is reliability. And when we can't provide that, meaning that we had many days where we were short operators to a point where we had to cut service, it starts to have a ripple effect in terms of people's confidence in our ability to meet our commitment to them. So our goal over the course of the next several months is to continue to really hammer in on getting that brand promise back, reliability, and improving the safety and reliability of the service overall. So we're going to be focused on that. That has less of an effect on the express, because those two issues truly aren't they don't have as many trips and that kind of thing. But as we get more operators, we'll cut less service during the peak on those random bases. That will help our confidence. but it's the urban local riders that are, as we talked about earlier, continue to be our bread and butter and one of the areas that we need to continue to focus. As you know, this year is also the year for our customer survey, and we really are looking at this customer survey in terms of what our existing customers are telling us has changed, so we can continue to adjust our priorities accordingly.
I can add too, as John, we're trying in different elements here, we're trying different things to affect the ridership and study that. In the express route, one of the interesting regional solicitation applications this year was to do, kind of look at what people are doing, paying for parking and locking into contracts, and try to encourage them to have a kind of an express plus parking type contract, where there's just days they can't take express because they have a half day, they have a meeting, but once they buy that parking contract for the month, which they're having to do because we're running out of daily parking options, then they don't take express. And so, working with MnDOT, the U, and there's a proposal I think that will get funded that'll try to redefine that parking contract. So, a certain number of days you'd be guaranteed a parking spot, but the incentive's there to take express plus. I think that's a missing element we've had that might affect like the express ridership as people are working shorter days or different days during the week than they would have in the past. So there's a lot of different elements, and that's an example of things we're trying to affect some of these numbers.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, a comment on the express discussion. You sort of dialed into something that I was thinking along these lines. There was a lot of communication from employers over the last year, whether for Super Bowl or even for I-35 construction promoting flex hours, remote working, different things like that. I'd be really interested to see, some of those trends that are dialed to working differently. You see more and more employers in the summer, and they're offering 4-day work weeks and Fridays off. And so are those affecting some of those express numbers? And then I did have a question. So the van pool numbers, when you look at those, obviously there's fewer van pools. But then the transit link, is that the same is there a similar thing happening there?
Sure. Madam Chair and Committee Member Barber, the reduction in the in the transit link ridership is really a correction that was made with the fare increase. So the fare on transit link went from $225 to, in some cases, $450, depending upon time of day. And so in my estimation, we right-sized the fare on transit link. We matched it with the Metro Mobility fare because it's a similar service. But people who were riding transit link due to the low fare and the acceptance of a 31-day pass on transit link, some of them have moved away because of the changes. And like I said, I think we have right-sized the fare on the service, and so we're just settling out from the fare increase.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hawkins.
Do we have statistics from the opt-outs on how their express is doing?
Madam Chair and Councilmember, we will report at the end of the year. We report their numbers once a year. But talking with them, it's been softer and their express too. So seem to be similar in line. That we haven't seen the actual numbers. They've been telling us that their ridership is down also.
Councilmember Munt.
Madam Chair, question for Brian. I read Tim Harlow's Star Tribune story today, which linked the ridership decline to the service changes that are happening on Saturday. And my takeaway was that we were able to make up for the lost revenue by getting rid of overlapping service. Is that right?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Munt. Actually, if you take a look at the multi-year trend, bus ridership is down more than 10%. So what we've been trying to do, especially the last year, is to make some service adjustments to better reflect that productivity. And so we have made some reductions in service, but when we have an option, as we did with a couple routes, is by reducing the cost per hour, in lieu of having to reduce that hour, we've chosen that path as well. So certain routes that we've ultimately are subcontracting out right now, we're doing that. And then we continue to have a dialogue for where routes might make more sense to come over to the higher productivity service that Metro Transit operates as well. So I think it's a fluid situation, but put it in perspective, when you take the service reduction and the contracted service out of the Metro Transit portfolio, it's about a little over 2%. So it's not, draconian in that sense. It's more of a reflection of our productivity, adjustments.
One concern I have is that, we know that our service is being impacted more nights and weekends, times when people feel it's more convenient to use the transportation network companies. But I get getting a little concerned that when we reduce our own service in response, we're continually decreasing our span of service, and we lose a lot of other rides as well because people don't take the trip at 4 because they can't get back at 8. Mm-hmm. And we could go into a kind of a death spiral.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Elkins, you hit it on the head. If we went strictly by productivity as opposed to making sure that we understand our market and where people have second and third shift employers or whatever it is, and then matching our service towards how that works. So it isn't strictly, one factor that we can consider. We figure where are those overlaps in service? What's the convenient walk distance that we would encourage by time of day or whatever? And so we've found ways to slim the system without necessarily reducing total access to service by time of day.
Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you. I am especially grateful that TAB funded in part along with the council and MnDOT a more robust travel behavior inventory, because it's clear that people are traveling differently, and the more data that we can collect on that, we can understand why that is and how we can adjust in the best, give people choices, but also provide these services widely to everyone and make sure they're efficient. So thank you. I think we don't have any other business unless there's any other announcements. We can adjourn. Thank you.